I'll try to express my view with respect to what has been happening globally and what the possible role of this country is and how we see the prospects of development. The International Discussion Club, Valdai, has gathered for the 22nd time, and these meetings not only have become a good tradition, and the discussions at the Valdai venue gives us an impartial opportunity to have an overview of the global situation, to register and comprehend and conceive these changes. Definitely the strong side of the Valdai Club is the capability of its participants to look beyond the trivial and the obvious, not following the agenda imposed by the global information space. And internet, has been contributing in various respects to that, and this is difficult to assess, trying to bring up our own issues and present our own visions, half opening the veil that conceals the day of tomorrow. This is not so easy, but sometimes we succeed, including here at this venue of Valdai. But we noted on many occasions that we're living at a juncture with rapid and profound changes. I'd say dramatic changes, and no one definitely can fully foresee the future. That does not rid us of obligation to be ready for anything that can happen. Actually, as the recent times and recent developments have shown, we should be ready for anything, and definitely everyone's responsibility is huge for the fate of their role and for this country, and the stakes are extremely high. The annual report of the Valdai Club has been dedicated this time to the multipolar, polycentric world. And this topic has long been on the agenda, but now it merits our special attention. I'm in agreement with the organizers. The actual multipolarity defines the frame of reference that the states operate in. I'd like to try to describe the distinctive traits of today. First of all, it is a much more open or creative space of foreign affairs conduct. There is nothing that has been predetermined in advance. Things may develop differently, and a lot depends on the accuracy and the balance of measure and the degree of restraint and the degree of well-thought-over actions of all the stakeholders. And in this ample space, it's very easy to lose your way and lose your bearings, and as we can see, that happens quite often. Secondly, this multipolar space is very dynamic. Changes happen, as I have said, rapidly and abruptly overnight, and it's hard to prepare for them, it's hard to predict them. One should respond instantly, in real time. Third, what is important, this space is much more democratic, paving the way for a big number of political economic stakeholders to come into play. Probably never in history we had that many countries in the global arena that seek to influence the regional and global developments, and a bigger role than ever before is played by the cultural, historical, civilization specifics of different countries. One should find common ground and concurrence of interest. No one is ready to play by the rules set by someone somewhere far away. As a well-known song goes, behind the mists or over the oceans. And hence the faith, all decisions are possible based on the accords that would be okay for all the interested or related stakeholders. Otherwise, no viable solution would be attained. Only and merely gaudy phrases and fruitless play of ambitions. Hence, to attain the results, harmony and balance are needed. And finally, the opportunities and threats of the multipolar world are inseparable from each other. Definitely, the weakening of dictate that was typical of the previous period and expansion of the freedom for all is an obvious boon. At the same time, in this context, it's much more difficult to strike this solid balance, which is actually a blatant and extreme risk per se. So such situation on the planet that I have tried to briefly portray is a brand new phenomenon. National affairs are going through a radical transformation. Paradoxically, multipolarity has become the direct effect of attempts to impose and maintain the global hegemony. The response of the international system and the history itself to the obtrusive aspiration to fit all in a single hierarchy with the West at the top. A failure of such an undertaking was only a matter of time, and we were warned about that always. And by historical standards, that happened quite rapidly. 35 years ago, when it seemed that the confrontation was coming to a close and the Cold War was coming to a close, we hoped that for an advent of the epoch of true cooperation, it seemed that no ideological and other obstacles were there that would preclude to resolve jointly uniform problems and common problems for the humankind, sorting out and resolving conflicts and disputes, building upon the mutual respect and taking into account everybody's interest. Let me digress and give a historical excursus here. Our country, wishing to eliminate the grounds for bloc-based confrontation, create the common space of security, stated 2 times that we were ready to join NATO. For the first time, it was back in 1954, in the Soviet times, and for the second time, during a visit by President Clinton, US President Clinton in Moscow in the year 2000, when we spoke about that with him, and both times we were turned down, straight away. I repeat, we were ready for joint work and non-linear steps in the global security and stability sphere, but our Western counterparts were not ready to rid themselves of the captivity of geopolitical and historical stereotypes and this simplistic world view. And I stated about that on many occasions in public. When we spoke with President Clinton, he said, it's very interesting, I think it's possible, but several hours later in the evening, he said, I sought the advice of my team, it's unfeasible. It boiled down to nothing. So a real opportunity to shift to the positive vector is something that we had, but alas, some different approach prevailed. The Western countries succumbed to see and have this absolute and wield this absolute power. This was a serious, strong temptation, and not to succumb, one had to have some historical vision and good intellectual level of education and groundwork, and those who made the decisions did not have this high capacity. The power of the United States and their allies peaked at the end of the 20th century, but there can be no single force that can run the world on its own, prescribing what should be done to everybody, how everyone should breathe. There were some attempts of that, but they all failed. At the same time, one should note that many believe that the so-called liberal world order was acceptable or even convenient. Well, yes, hierarchy would limit the capability of those who are not at the top of the pyramid, of the food chain, if you permit me, but still, at the same time, they reside at the food, but still, that would lift a big chunk of responsibility from them. Just the rules are as follows: just accept the set of conditions, fit into the system, and you receive your dues, and be happy, think of nothing. Others will think and make decisions instead of you, no matter what they say, no matter what they use as pretexts. That was the case, and the experts in this room know that. Some people were conceited enough to believe that they can admonish everybody. Others played up to the strong ones, being an obedient bargaining chip and item in trade, avoiding problems and receiving their small perks. And now in the old world in Europe, we have a lot of such politicians left still. Those who were not in agreement, tried to uphold their interests, were considered kind of weirdos, to put it mildly, and they were told nothing will come out of that, and so you are nothing against our power, an empty spot. The most recalcitrant ones were educated by the self-proclaimed grandees, and without any scruples, and resistance was useless, they said. That did not result in anything good. Not a single global problem was resolved. At the same time, still new and new problems keep piling up. The global governance institutions created in the past either don't operate and work properly or have lost their efficiency to a huge extent, no matter what capability or potential a single country might have. Any power has its limits, and in Russia we know that there is a proverb saying might makes right. However, there may be a stronger might. There always can be a stronger might. You know, this is the gist of the global developments. There may always be a stronger might. Attempts to control everything around oneself would result in overstraining and overload, and that would impact the internal stability, weaken the internal stability, giving rise to legitimate questions among the nationals of those countries who try to act as grandees. You know, some time ago I heard similar things from our American colleagues who said that we acquired the world but we lost America. I just want to ask a question. Was it worth it? And have they acquired anything at all? The leading Western European societies are now seeing repulsion of the excessive ambitions of the political leadership. The barometer shows that the establishment doesn't want to cede power, and they have been engaged in direct deception of their nationals, trying to use ploys and that are legal borderline cases or are beyond the law. You know, turning democratic election procedures into a farce and manipulating the will of their people is something that they cannot keep doing forever. And that has been happening in many countries. I will not be specific. In some countries, they're trying to prohibit or ban their political opponents who have been acquiring more legitimacy and trust among the voters. We saw this movie in the Soviet times. We had it in the USSR. Just recall the song by Vygotsky. The military parade was prohibited. Everything will be prohibited shortly. The prohibitions won't work. And the will of the people is simple. Let the leadership cater to the needs and the living standards of the people, not chasing chimeras. The United States, where the bottom-up sentiment of the people led to a radical change of the political vector, is a vivid example, and these examples can be contagious. The subordination of the majority to minority that is typical of international relations during the Western domination has been giving way to a cooperative approach, a multilateral one, based on the respect for everyone's interests and the accords between the key stakeholders. That is no guarantee of the harmony or absence of conflicts. The interests of countries will never coincide fully, and all the history of international affairs is about struggle to fulfill their interests. But you know, a brand new global situation, the tone set by the global community and the global majority, let us hope that all the stakeholders will take each other's interests into account while coming up with regional and global solutions. No one can attain their goals on their own in isolation. The world, despite the aggravation of conflicts and the crisis of previous model of globalization, fragmentation of the global economy, is a holistic, interrelated place. We know that by our own experience. You know how much efforts were applied by our opponents to, roughly speaking, knock this country out of the global system, to drive us into political, cultural, information isolation, into economic autarky. The number, in terms of the number of the reprisals that are shamefully dubbed as sanctions, Russia has the record, 30 or even more thousand of different restrictions. Have they attained anything? I think that people around the room know that these efforts failed altogether. Russia has demonstrated the highest degree of resilience and ability to withstand intensive global pressure that would ruin an entire country, not only an entire country, but a coalition of states. And we take pride in that. We're proud of our our country, of Russia, and our people and our armed forces. But I want to mention something else. It turned out that the global system, where they want to squeeze us out of, will not let Russia go, because Russia has become a weighty part of the global equilibrium and balance, not only because of its territory and people and defense and technological industrial capability and its minerals, its reserves. All those things I have just enumerated matter a lot. These are very important factors, but most importantly, it is so because the global equilibrium and balance cannot be established without us, neither economic or strategical or cultural, logistical, no type of balance. I believe that those who tried to destroy that, well, got to know. Some are still obstinate in their desire to have their way, inflicting, as they say, the strategic defeat on this country. Well, okay, if they don't see the fact that this plan is doomed, if they're stubborn enough, well, I hope that life will show them, and the most stubborn, short-witted ones will understand. We heard numerous clamors about full blockade and threats about blockade, trying to make Russian people, as they said, and they had no scruples in saying that they wanted to make the Russian people suffer. And they came up with figmental plans. I think, ain't it time to calm down and look around and understand the real situation and try to build relationships in a different way? We also know the polycentric world is very dynamic. It seems brittle and unsustainable because you cannot establish the state of things forever, defining the alignment of forces. There are multiple stakeholders and processes and non-symmetrical forces, complex ones. Everybody has their own strengths and competitive edges that create a unique combination and a composition in each of the cases. The world of today is a sophisticated, multifaceted system. To comprehend it correctly, simple laws of logic or cause and effect ties will not suffice. Complexity philosophy is what is needed, something similar to the quantum mechanics that is much more sophisticated than the classical physics. At the same time, thanks to this complexity, the overall negotiability has a trend to go up. The linear unilateral solutions are impossible. Non-linear multilateral ways require considerable professional, impartial and creative, sometimes non-standard diplomacy. I'm convinced that we will witness a certain renaissance of the high diplomatic art. And the essence is about the way to pursue dialogue, coming to terms with the neighbors and single-minded stakeholders, and which is more difficult, come to terms with your opponents. In this spirit of the diplomacy of the 21st century, the new institutions have been developing, the expanding BRICS group and the major regional entities like Shanghai Cooperation Organization in Eurasia, and more compact but no less important regional groupings. There are numerous appearing around the globe. You know about them quite well. All these new structures are different, but they are united by the same trait, a very important one. They don't function on the hierarchical principle, subordination to someone who is considered to be the main one. They are not against anyone there for their own interests. This world of today needs accords, not imposition of someone's will. Hegemony, any type of it, will not cope with the scale of the agenda. Providing for international security in these terms is a very, very relevant and comprehensive matter. The growing number of stakeholders with different goals and polycentric cultures, their own identical original traditions. The global complexity makes it much more difficult and complicated to come up with this new approaches towards global security, but it gives us new opportunities. The bloc-style ways that are doomed to give rise to confrontation have become anachronic, pointless. We see that our European neighbors are now trying to patch up the cracks and plaster the cracks of the edifice of Europe. They want to overcome this cleft, to strengthen the shaken unity that they were so proud of and flaunted with, not because of resolving, not with the help of resolving their own domestic problems, but, you know, stoking up the enemy image. But people in those countries are wise enough to, you know, take to the streets, and despite they stoke up situation at the outer border, they try to recreate the well-known enemy that they invented hundreds of years ago, Russia. And many people in Europe do not know what's so horrible about Russia. Why should they tighten their belts countering Russia, forgetting about their own interests, sacrificing them, and acting in their own detriment? But, you know, the ruling elites of the United Europe try to stoke up hysteria. They say that the war with the Russians is in the offing, and they keep repeating that gibberish over and over again. You know, I look and hear what has been said. I'm bewildered. Can they be serious? Can they believe in what they're saying, that Russia is trying to attack them? This is impossible to believe, and they try to convince their own people of that, and they may be non-competent. Either non-competent if they believe in that, because it's impossible to believe in this nonsense, or they may be decent enough, because they do not believe in that themselves, but try to convince their own people. Just calm down and sleep quiet, and try to get to grips with your problems. Look at what has been happening at the European streets, what has been happening with the European economy and industry, huge crisis in their culture and identity, huge debt burden, and growing social welfare system, the migration that has veered out of control, growth of violence, radicalization of leftist, ultra-liberal, racist, marginal groupings. Look at Europe being relegated to the periphery of the global competition. We all know that the threats, aggressive threats towards Russia that Europe has been trying to intimidate itself with are far-fetched. And the auto-suggestion is a dangerous thing, and we cannot, unfortunately, fail to pay heed to that, and we must take that into consideration because of the need to sustain our defense and security. And we're looking at the militarization of Europe that has been gathering pace. Are these plain words or simple words or lip service, or is it serious? Because they say that the German army should be the most powerful in Europe. Okay, we have been listening to that attentively and eyeing that closely, trying to figure what they actually mean. I believe that no one has any doubts that the response of Russia will not be long in coming. The response to such threats will be, to put it mildly, quite convincing. This is about the response. We never initiated any military standoff. It's pointless, uncalled for, and absurd. It would drive us away from resolving real problems and challenges, and the societies sooner or later will bring their leaderships to account for ruining and ignoring their needs and aspirations and hopes. But if someone has a desire to rival with us in the military sphere, okay, go for it. Endeavor. Russia proved on many occasions when threats to our peace and security come to the fore, and threats to our sovereignty and our statehood, we are swift in responding. No, you should not provoke us. Never ever did it end badly for the provocateurs, and no exceptions will happen in future. There'll be none. Our history proved that weakness is unacceptable because it gives rise to temptation, to a delusion that anything may be resolved with us, and they may have their way from the position of force and indecisiveness and weakness. Russia will never demonstrate that. It is something that we will never demonstrate. Those who cherish the dream of inflicting a strategic defeat of us, let them know that. And those speaking actively about that. Well, some of them are far away, others, have passed away. There are no objective reasons related. There are very many reasons related to the man-made or social nature. So it's no use spending forces and energy on artificial, contrived contradictions. This is wasteful and silly. International security is so multifaceted and indivisible that no delimitation.
The reasons for the Ukrainian conflict are well known to anyone who has gone far enough to look at the back history of its current most critical stage. And I will not repeat myself. I'm sure that everyone here is well aware and understands my position on the issue. I have voiced it many, many times, but we also know something else. Those who encouraged, goaded, and armed Ukraine, stirring it up against Russia, for decades fostered rampant nationalism and neo-Nazism, simply couldn't care less, not only for Russian interests, but for Ukrainian interests either, for true interests of the people of that country. They have no remorse for that people. It's nothing but expendable material for globalist expansionists on the West, as well as their serfs in Kiev. The results of reckless filibusterism speak for themselves. Let's ask ourselves another question. Could it be different? And allow me to go back to what President Trump said. He said that had he been in power, that could have been avoided. And I agree with that statement. It's true, it could have been avoided had the work been built differently with the US administration back in the day. If Ukraine hadn't been turned into a destructive weapon in someone else's arms, had they not used the Northern Atlantic bloc approaching our borders, had Ukraine preserved its independence, its true sovereignty? And another question, how should we have resolved bilateral Russian-Ukrainian issues that were obviously consequence of disintegration of a massive country and complex geopolitical transformations? I believe that even the disintegration of the USSR had to do with the position of the Russian leadership back in the day to get rid of any ideological confrontation, hoping that now that we've dealt with communism, now we will build a true flourishing world. No, but it seems that there are other factors at play, geopolitical and factors of different kind, and ideological clashes had nothing to do with it. How should they be resolved in a polycentric world? And how would the situation in Ukraine be resolved? Its different poles would test out the situation of the Ukrainian conflict for themselves. These potential pressure points, rifts that exist in their own regions, and then the collective response would be much more responsible and reasonable. At the basis of resolving would be the understanding that all the participants of this complex situation have their own interests. They're grounded in objective, subjective circumstances. They must not be overlooked. Efforts of all countries in their quest for security and development are legitimate. Of course, this applies for Ukraine, for Russia, and for all our neighbors. It's the states of the region who should have the final say in creating the regional system. It's these countries who have the best chance at agreeing on a universally acceptable model of cooperation because it affects them directly. It is of their vital interests. For other countries, this situation in Ukraine is a bargaining chip in a different, much larger game, their own game. And generally, that game has nothing to do with specific issues of countries, or in this case, for that country or those countries involved in the conflict. It's just a pretext to solve their own goals as well as to profit from war. That's why they showed up on our doorstep with NATO infrastructure. For years, they sat idly by, gazing at the Donbass tragedy, the genocide, at the extermination of Russian people at our ancestral historical lands that started in 2014 after the bloody coup d'etat in Ukraine. In contrast to this behavior that was demonstrated by Europe and, until recently, the US, is the conduct of the global majority states. They refuse to take sides. They aspire to truly contribute to the creation of a just world, and we're grateful to all the states who in recent years have taken genuine effort to try and find a way out of this situation. These are our partners, the founders of BRICS, China, India, Brazil, South Africa, the Belarus, North Korea. These are our friends in the Arab Islamic world. First and foremost, Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Egypt, Turkey, Iran, Serbia, Hungary, Slovakia in Europe, and many African and Latin American countries. Unfortunately, so far we haven't been able to stop the hostilities, but the responsibility for that lies not on the majority for this inability, but on the minority, first and foremost Europe, who continue to escalate the conflict. And I believe there is no other goal over there. At the same time, I believe that goodwill shall prevail, and we have no doubt about this. I believe that the situation is changing gradually in Ukraine. No matter how brainwashed people may get, there are still some shifts in their ideology, and in other parts of the world as well. At the same time, the phenomenon of the global majority is a new development in the international life. Allow me to say a few words about that as well. What is its purpose? That the overwhelming majority of states is aimed at implementing their own civilized interests, the main of which is its balanced progressive development. And it seems that it should be natural, that's how it's always been. But in earlier eras, the understanding of these interests was distorted with morbid ambitions, with selfishness, with the influence of expansionist ideologies. And now, the majority of states and nations, that very same global majority, understand their authentic interests. And most importantly, they feel strong and confident enough in order to uphold these interests despite the external pressure. And I should add, by promoting and defending their interests, they're ready to work together with their partners. That is to say, to translate international relations, diplomacy, integration, into the source of growth, progress, and development. The relations within the global majority is a prototype of political practices necessary and effective in a polycentric world. This is pragmatism and realism, rejection of bloc philosophy, absence of rigid, dictated commitments, models where there are senior or junior partners. And finally, it's the ability to align interests that don't always coincide, but at the same time, they usually don't contradict one another. So the absence of antagonism is the main principle. We see a new wave of de facto decolonization that is gaining momentum, where former colonies, aside from statehood, also gain political, economical, cultural, and ideological sovereignty. And in this context, another important date is very important to note here. We celebrated 80 years since the creation of the United Nations organization. It's not just the most representative, universally political structure of the world. It symbolizes the spirit of cooperation, alliance, brothers in arms that helped in first half of former century to unite our efforts to defeat the greatest evil in history, the merciless machine of extermination and enslavement. And of course, the decisive role in this joint victory belongs to the US. Just take a look at the number of victims of the anti-Hitler coalition and everything will become clear. The UN, of course, is the legacy of victory in the Second World War. To this day, it is the most successful experience of creating the international organizations through which we can resolve the most urgent world problems. And we often hear that the UN system is paralyzed, that it's in crisis. It's become the common position. Some even go as far as to say that it has become obsolete and it should be radically reformed. Yes, of course, there are a lot of issues in the work of the UN, but we do not have a better alternative than the UN. We have to admit that the problem is not with the UN because its potential, it's virtually endless. The issue is how we, ourselves, these united, and although more often than not now disunited nations, use these opportunities. Of course, UN is facing certain challenges, just like any other organization, it needs to adapt to changing realities. But in the process of its restructuring, configuration, it is especially important not to lose sight or twist the main idea of the organization, not just the one that was embedded when creating the whole UN system, but also the newfound idea that has arisen in the process of its complicated development. We should recall that since 1945, the number of UN member states has practically quadrupled. The organization that has come up at the initiative of several largest countries during the decades of its existence has not just expanded, it has absorbed many different cultures and political traditions. It has gained diversity, has truly become multipolar way before the world has taken that path. The potential laid in the UN system is only beginning to unfold, and I'm sure that in the new era we're entering, it will only pick up the pace. In other words, now the countries of the global majority form the convincing majority, even within the UN, which means its structure and its governing bodies need to be brought up into the line accordingly, so that it fully aligns with the basic principles of democracy. We will not deny there is no unanimity as to how to organize the world, which principles it should be based on in the upcoming years and decades. We have entered a long stage of searching, in many ways stumbling in the dark. Once we have a new sustainable system, its framework remains unknown. But we should be prepared that for a considerable time, socio-political and economical processes will be hard to predict and sometimes quite nerve-wracking. In order to keep those clear guidelines and not lose our way, we need a strong support. First and foremost, these are values cultivated in national cultures over the centuries, culture, history, ethical and religious norms, the influence of geography and environment are key elements from which civilizations are born. Special entities that have been created over centuries that determine national identity, value orientations, traditions, all that serves as a guideline, allowing us to find our way and allowing us to weather the storms of rough waters of international life. Tradition is a very distinctive, unique thing. Everyone has their own, and respect for traditions is first and foremost a condition for a prosperous development of international relations, as well as resolution of arising issues. The world has withstood the efforts of unification, of forcing of so-called universal model that went against the cultural and ethical traditions of many nations. Back in the day, the Soviet Union indulged in it, trying to impose its political system. We're aware of it, and I don't think anyone will try to argue that. Then the US took over, but the Europe has come up big as well. But in both cases, nothing was achieved. Perfunctory, extrinsic, artificial, something imposed doesn't last long. And those who have respect for their traditions usually doesn't encroach on others. Today, against the backdrop of international instability, it is especially important to lay your own groundwork of development that is independent on the international whirlwinds. And we see how many countries and nations turn to these foundations. And it's not only happening in the global majority states, but in Western societies as well. If everyone operates and follows these principles, taking care of themselves without wasting effort on unnecessary ambitions, turns out that getting along with others becomes much easier. I would like to give you an example of cooperation between Russia and the US. Of course, our countries have a lot of differences, and our views on many world issues differ. And for large powers, it's natural, it's normal. Most importantly, it's how we overcome these differences. And the current White House administration speak directly, firmly, using point-blank statements without being hypocritical. It is especially important to understand what the person wants, instead of trying to drown in the series of ambiguities and these misty hints. And we understand that President Donald Trump and his team are operating on the interests of their countries as they see them. This is a rational approach, but at the same time, we need to admit that we have the right to operate based on our own national interests, one of which is the restoration of full format relations with the US. And no matter the differences, if we treat each other with respect, then even the most firm, persistent bargaining will still pursue the goal of finding something mutually beneficial, and then we can find solutions to any issues. Multipolar world and polycentric world is a reality that is here to stay. How fast and how effective it will be depends on every single one of us And this order and this model in the modern world is only possible as a result of universal efforts. The work where everyone participates, allow me to reiterate, times where the narrow group of the most powerful nations decided for the whole world on how to live, is irretrievably gone. And those who feel nostalgia for colonial times when people were divided into those who are equal or those who are more equal than others should remember that this is a famous quote from Orwell's dystopia. We in Russia were never known for such racist approach to other countries, nations, cultures. It has never been our course, and it will never be our course. We advocate for polyphony, diversity, symphony of values. One color world would be a dull place. Russia's path is tumultuous and it's full of unexpected turns. The formation of Russia's statehood is a constant overcoming of colossal historical challenges. That is not to say that other states were brought up in house conditions, but at the same time, Russia's experience is quite unique, just as the country that's been brought up in it. And we're not trying to pretend that we're exceptional or supreme. That is just a statement of the fact and of our identity. We have survived a lot of shocks, given enough food for thought, both negative and positive. And we're living in a quite ambiguous international situation that is non-linear. And in any vicissitudes, Russia has proven one thing. It has existed, it continues to exist, and will exist. Things are changing. Our role is changing, but it remains a power that is necessary in order to preserve harmony and balance. This is a time-tested, history-tested fact, and it's unconditional. But in today's multipolar world, this harmony and the balance that I've talked about can only be achieved through joint work. And I would like to assure you that Russia is prepared for such work. Thank you so much for your attention.